Hi there folks, so welcome back to my channel. For this video I'm going to be talking about something that I've been interested in pretty much my whole life, and as you can probably guess from the title, it's going to be looking at some folklore. And so it's going to be specifically looking at some Scottish folklore and it's going to be things from Scottish folklore that I think should be bigger things within the fantasy genre as a whole. But I will get on to talk about that in a bit more detail in just a moment. A wee bit of housekeeping first. If you enjoy my channel, if you enjoy my videos, if you can click on the subscribe button, click on that notification bell, leave some likes, leave some comments, it's always really appreciated. And if you'd like to support the channel further, I will post a link to the channel's ko-fi.com page in the description bar below, along with the channel's PayPal account as well. And so, with that out of the road, again, as I was saying, folklore has been something that I've been interested in since I was a kid, and mythology as well. I've got quite a few books around the house about like folklore, so like Vikings, Irish folklore, the whole shebang. And I was lucky enough that it was my birthday the other day, and somebody was actually kind enough to buy me a book looking at Scottish folklore. So it's it's the anthology of Scottish folklore. I try to see who it's by. So it's the anthology of Scottish folk tales, and it's a collection of different tales from all over Scotland, and it's by the History Press. So we've got like stories from like the Western Isles, Shetland, Perthshire, the Borders, Argyll, so pretty much from different parts of Scotland. And so I probably will have to do a little video on this at some point, but it does look like it be filled with a lot of different really good little stories. And I have to admit, I do love the artwork they have on the front of the book. It's just a very emotive, very muted colours, but just has a very timeless feel about it. But then again, I'm not here to talk about this book. So essentially I wanted to look at some figures or creatures from Scottish folklore, Scottish mythology, that I think definitely should be a bigger thing than the fantasy genre. Because again, a lot of times we have like the usual staples. We have like things from classical mythology and folklore. So we've got like centaurs, we've got like demigods, that sort of thing. Things like dragons, which again are very much a staple of so many different folklores and traditions. But the first one I want to talk about is called the Cooshie. And if you see this written down, it probably doesn't really look like it's spelt the way it's pronounced, because it's two words. So the first word is C-U, so that's the Q part. The second part is she, which is spelled S-I-T-H. And a lot of English speakers, if they see that written down, will automatically think, oh, that's Sith, and we'll automatically think of Star Wars. But no, we're not talking about Darth Sidious, we're not talking about Darth Vader, we're talking about Scottish folklore. So the Cooshie is essentially Gaelic for Hound of the Fairies, and that's like a direct translation. So because Coo means hound and she means fairies, or fairy. So it's Hound of the Fairies or Fairy Hound. And it's usually in the stories is large, and it's roughly about the same size of a calf. So it's probably kind of on the size of like the bigger end of the scale of dogs. And it's got long, shaggy green fur. So it's pretty distinctive. And usually within the myths, within the stories, the hound will bark 3 times, And by the time you hear the third bark, you have to be safely inside, locked in the safety of your home, because it is believed that if you weren't safely locked within your home by the time the Kushi barked for the third time, the Kushi would bring about your death. And so it's quite a dark kind of figure within Scottish folklore. Probably, so essentially it's the Scottish Highland version of like Black Shuck, that you'd find in England. And it is also believed that the Kushi would just try to do my handwriting here, would spirit away nursing mothers and children and essentially bring them to the fairy realm. So that does seem to be a very common fear and worry in times past, that the fairies would whisk away mothers and children. And yeah, again, it was the Kushi was believed to be part of that. But then again, I think that probably was very much tied to the higher mortality rates in the past, where children would die, both children and mothers would die in childbirth or would die after childbirth. And this is obviously kind of an explanation for why that would happen. But the figure of the Kushi itself, again, very much does bring to mind a lot of these ideas of like maybe like the Hound of the Baskervilles, which was very much more influenced by like the English stories of like hellhounds. But I do think that the Kushi aspect could be definitely something that could be made more of. And there is another version, and I do hope I'm pronouncing the first bit properly. It's the Keitshi, where essentially it's the feline cat version of the Kushi. And it was often described as being large, what the size of a dog, and I'm guessing it means the size of like a large dog, maybe something the size of like a German Shepherd or something. And it'd be black all over with like one white spot on its chest. And some traditions do suggest that the Keitshi was a witch and rather than a fairy, even though it does have the she aspect to its name, which ties it to the fairies. And that essentially this was the witch taking cat form. I know there are stories of witches with it apparently take like feline form, and on a night at a time they wouldn't be able to transform back into human form. And yeah, so that was apparently where we get the 9 lives idea from for cats. So I don't know if it was maybe tied to that tradition. But it's also believed that the Keitshi would steal the souls of the dead, but not the living. And people would actually leave out bowls of fresh milk or cream, so in order to try and keep on the good side of the Keitshi. And essentially there were stories of households not leaving out fresh milk and cream for the Keitshi being cursed by the Keitshi itself. So yeah, when you actually look at a lot of the Scottish myths and folklore, it's fairly dark. Not all of it, but a lot of it does seem to be fairly dark. And this does seem to continue with the next one I'm going to be talking about, which is the Kelpies. And a lot of people probably will think of the Kelpies as being the equine statues out towards Falkirk They stand on, I think it's the Union Canal, and which were actually based on two of the Clydesdale horses that used to be stabled within Pollock Park, which they're actually, the horses are currently no longer stabled there. But the Kelpie itself was a water spirit, again, hence why that's probably part of the reason why the Kelpies at Falkirk are next to the water and very much have a water symbolism about them, but they are themselves there to celebrate the working horse heritage connected to canals. But with the Kelpies, they are water spirits that are often associated with lochs or rivers. I think sometimes with the seas as well, but it's often lochs and rivers. And it would usually take the form of a horse. Not always, but usually. And they would be these resplendent, beautiful horses that would stand on the shore, waiting for somebody to come by. They'd usually have a bit of some kelp, like some seaweed in their manes and in their tails. But if you looked closely, but they wouldn't really look out of place. They would look like these beautiful horses just standing there, without an owner, without a bridle. But if you looked closely, there'd be one thing that would usually give them away. That's because their hooves, rather than facing the way a horse's hoof would normally face, they'd be facing backwards. But most people probably wouldn't be looking that closely. They'd see a beautiful horse, they'd want to go over and they'd want to clap the horse. So that's what a lot of the stories entail. It's like people would go over and they would stroke the horse, or they'd get on the horse's back and they'd realise too late that they couldn't remove their hands from the horse's side. They couldn't remove themselves from the horse's back. And in that moment they realised that they were in the presence of a Kelpie, and it was now too late. And that essentially at that moment that the Kelpie would rush off towards the water, dragging the person with them, rush into the water and dive underneath the depths, drowning the person in the process. But there are also some instances of Kelpies taking human forms. So be it as a stunningly beautiful young man or a stunningly beautiful young woman, and it would entice people over to them, and then pretty much do the same as it did in horse form. So very much a dark story. I usually see that as being very much a cautionary tale, probably to warn children away from getting too close to rivers or to lochs, and try and obviously stop people from causing mischief to themselves. And a fourth one, it's probably a bit more of a modern one. No, maybe one that's not really as well known as a lot of others. And this one does have a Gaelic name, but I'm not going to try and pronounce it because I probably will butcher it. But in English, it's called The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. And Ben Macdui is Scotland's and the UK's second largest mountain. So that's after Ben Nevis, which is over at Fort William. But with Ben Macdui, it's located up in the Cairngorms, which is up in the northeast of Scotland. The Cairngorms National Park is actually the second national park in Scotland. It was actually founded after Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, but as not one that I've actually had the chance to properly visit yet. I've skirted through it, I've seen the Cairngorms from a distance. They are very much, they very much dominate the surrounding area. So a lot of the surrounding area is fairly flat, and then there's these big mountains. But they are very popular with mountaineers, mountain climbers, that sort of people, right? And that's a lot of people who have come back with these stories of the big grey man. So a lot of times what people have come back saying is that they've heard what sounds like somebody following them down the mountain. And it sounds like somebody with a longer stride than themselves. That for every 3 steps that they take, this person following them down takes 1. And that they have this feeling of foreboding, of being followed, of being watched, but they don't see anything. They have these feelings and they hear these sounds, noises. But there have been some cases of people saying that they've seen the big grey man, and that what they claim to have seen is this human-like figure that's about 10 foot tall, very thin, with long limbs, and has dark skin. Hence why he's called the big grey man. And it's, I think the first recorded account of coming across a big grey man was made in 1925, but the person who was saying that they'd seen the big grey man was saying that they'd seen it back in 1891, and this claim was made by J. Norman Colley, who was a noted mountaineer. And he came back and it was years after the event took place. He was saying they had this experience up on Ben Macdhu. And there have been others who've come forward since saying that they've had similar experiences, they've felt similar things or seen similar things. But a lot of what people have claimed to have seen or experienced while up in Ben Macdhu people have tried to give natural or rational explanations for what has happened. And they range from illusions, including something like the Brocken Spectre, which essentially when you are surrounded by mist or fog, the sun's behind you and it's breaking through, and it casts your shadow onto the fog. And it usually has a kind of halo around its head, what the shadow does. And it creates this sense of looking at something a lot bigger than yourself, with elongated limbs, and it looks very strange, especially if you've never come across a Brocken Spectre before. I've never seen one myself in real life. I've seen video recordings of one. I think it was Murray from Scotland's Mountains. One of his videos, he shows a Brocken Spectre as a Brocken Spectre himself. So it is something that does happen out in the mountains. But other explanations have been given for the big grey man is hallucinations. So somebody's exhausted and they're isolated, especially somewhere like the Cairngorms, where you can have all these strange noises, right? You can have like the winds coming down through cracks and rocks, creates a very eerie atmosphere. Your imagination can run away with you. You can think that what you're experiencing is something different from what you're actually experiencing. And so it essentially can be boiled down to the misinterpretation of natural sounds and phenomena. But again, it's one of those stories that even though a natural explanation can be given, has been given, it still has that darkness and mystery about it. It's like, what if? You can imagine somebody, people or a group of people sitting around a fire telling stories of the big grey man, going, oh, so-and-so saw something up in the mountain, or they heard something, and this is what they told us. So it does have that aspect to it. And I think a creature like the big grey man could definitely be an interesting aspect or an interesting addition to a story. And it's maybe kind of one that's overlooked and maybe not as well known. And maybe one that's not as dark. A wee light note to end the video on. But this one is called the Wolver. And it's one that is found up in Shetland. So up essentially halfway between Scotland and Norway is the Shetland Islands. And the figure of the wolver is sometimes described as being Scotland's werewolf. But it's not really a werewolf, because with a werewolf, it's someone who is cursed by the gods or by having been bitten by somebody who is already a werewolf and is forced to transform every month into this wolf-like creature. And is usually bloodthirsty, destructive, has a taste for human flesh. The wolver, on the other hand, is quite a solitary figure. Tends to keep himself to himself. There's usually it's one that is seen, as far as I know, and is a human-like figure with a wolf's head and is covered in fur, but never transforms. That is the form that he always takes. He's never a man at one point and a wolf-like at the next moment. He's always human-like with a wolf's head, and tends to live in a cave on the shore. And apparently there's a stone or a rock just a wee bit off the coast in Shetland called the Wolver Stane. Apparently this is where the wolver will sit and fish, because that's what he eats, is fish. And there have been some stories of families who have fallen on hard times, who are struggling to feed themselves and are going hungry. And they'll wake up one morning and there'll be fish left at their front door or on the outside ledge of the window. And this has often been described as being a gift from the wolver. The wolver somehow figured out or found out that this person or this family needs a wee helping hand and will leave some food for them outside their house. So I think even though the wolver has wrongly been described as being Scotland's werewolf, he's definitely not the bloodthirsty, destructive sort. He's a friendly creature who generally just wants to be left alone, but definitely one that is sort of often overlooked and not really well known about, but I think should be better known about. And yeah, so those are 5 the figures or creatures from Scottish folklore that I think should be somehow worked into the fantasy genre. And yeah, so hopefully you will all have enjoyed this video. Hopefully you will have all found it interesting. Do excuse the voice, and I'm getting a bit croaky now. And hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. And if you are wanting to hear more about different figures from Scottish folklore, different stories from Scottish folklore, definitely let me know in the description bar below, and I'll see what I can do. So I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.